if you're new with us here, what we do weekly is we study through the Bible. And that means that we start in a book and we continue to the end of that book. And we've found ourselves in the Gospel of Luke. We've been there for quite a time, over a year now, looking at the life of Jesus. And we're coming now toward the end of that life. We're just down to days before Jesus is crucified. And we have made our way all the way to chapter 21. And we get some incredible passages in front of us, and just exciting what Jesus is going to be sharing with his disciples. This week we're going to look at Jesus and his heart toward a widow. And then next time we're in the Gospel of Luke, we're going to be looking at end times, the signs of the times. We're going to be looking at just the prophecies that Jesus had given concerning the last days. And so we get some amazing passages, and we're going to take our time through some of those and just really look at what it is that Jesus declares when it comes to the days. And I believe we're living in those days, and we're going to kind of be able to put that to Scripture and just kind of have a good glimpse of what Jesus declares. And so we'll be doing that in the weeks ahead. Right now, we're going to take chapter 21, and we're just going to look at the first 4 verses. And let me kind of prepare you, or kind of get the setting for us this morning. Remember, Jesus had entered into Jerusalem just a day earlier. He had fulfilled prophecy by riding in on a colt that had never been ridden. And he comes down the Mount of Olives, and he declares himself to be the Messiah. And everyone's throwing down their palm branches, their clothes, they're acknowledging, and they're saying that he's the Messiah. And the Pharisees are seeing this, and they're furious. They, Jesus, tell your disciples to stop it. You know, they're declaring you to be the Messiah. And Jesus says, look, if these were not singing, the very rocks would be crying out. You see, Jesus was telling them, I am who they declare that I am. I'm the Messiah that you've been longing and waiting for. And if they weren't saying it, even the very creation would be saying it. He retires that day and comes back the next morning, and he goes into the temple and he begins to clean house, as the Messiah would if he would come on the scene. He goes in, I'm going to fix what's wrong. That's exactly what he does. He turns over the money changers, the tables of the money changers. He chases out all the animal sacrifices that were being offered up, taking advantage of the people that were coming in to worship God. And then Jesus, in the court of the Gentiles, begins to heal the lame and the blind, the sick, the hurting. They were walking in limping, and they were walking out running. They were walking in, they couldn't see. As they walked out, they had full sight, 20/20 vision. And everyone there knew that Jesus had some authority. But the Pharisees are going to question that authority. And they're really saying, who gave you the authority to do this? And Jesus goes, I'll tell you who gave me the authority to do this if you tell me this. And he says, did John's baptism come from heaven, or did it come from the earth? And they say, well, we're not going to answer you, because they knew if they answered them, they were going to incriminate themselves. And so Jesus goes, you want to answer me? I'm not answering you. Pretty simple, right? I love Jesus. You just asking this just to try to trap me, or try to put me in some corner. I'm not going to waste my time telling you, because you're not going to believe me if I did tell you. And then they ask him, they started plotting. And one by one, it was the Pharisees, the Herodians, the Sadducees, the scribes. These are all different sects. And one by one, they come and they try to trap Jesus. They try to trap him. They ask him questions like, well, is it okay to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Well, that was a loaded question. Because what was going to happen was, if he said one or the other, he was going to divide the crowd. Some believed Romans, and the Herodians were there. They believed you're supposed to pay taxes to Caesar. And the Jews thought that it was an abomination that they had to pay taxes to Caesar. And you want to get someone tainted. You want to shed a bad light on somebody. You just start bringing accusations against them. We're watching all this play out in our political arena right now. You just say something that they did, or you get someone to think that they're standing on some side that they literally aren't standing on, but you just give the implication that that's true, and then you've just turned half the people against you. And all of this was playing out, and they were trying to trap Jesus, but Jesus, tells them, hey, let me see a coin, one of your Roman coins, or if you want to wonder if you should pay taxes to Caesar or not, give me your coin. And he gives them a coin, and he says, whose inscription is on that coin? And it was the inscription of Caesar. He says, I'll tell you what, throws him the coin back. Why don't you give to Caesar what's Caesar's and give to God what's God's? Can you imagine Jesus at that point, what do you do? He trapped them. Because whose image was stamped on them? God's. Because they were created in the image of God, just like you're created in the image of God. And if you're created in the image of God, then you belong to him. And so Jesus gets their attention, right? And at this point, it was one after one after they tried religious, they tried political, the liberal, the legal. I mean, they were coming at him in every way, and Jesus silenced them at every turn. And it would have been a long day at the temple. I mean, think about it. From morning, turning over the tables, to healing the lame and the blind, preaching the kingdom. And then after that, all of these attacks that came upon him. I mean, that would have been a long day of ministry. And at the end of that day, we find out, and we're going to read from the passages here shortly, that Jesus goes and he sits down, and he's going to sit in the court of the women. He had been in the court of the Gentiles, and he had cleaned that out. Now he's going into the court of the women, and he's going to have a seat there, and he's just going to observe. I mean, you ever go somewhere and you just kind of watch people? You go to the airport and you just kind of, just like, wow, people are crazy. You just people watching. You go to the mall, you just like, you just watch people, just the things they do, and you just kind of, Jesus is just there observing what was going on around him. And that's the scene that we find here. I want you to turn to two places. First is going to be first let's go to Mark chapter 12. Let's start there. Mark chapter 12. The same account. We got Mark, who gives us a little more insight than Luke does in this account, or gives us some more details, I should say, in this account that we miss in Luke. So it's chapter 12. Look at verse 41. Now, Jesus sat opposite the treasury, and he saw how the people put money into the treasury. And many who were rich put in much. Then one poor widow came and threw in 2 mites, which make a quadrans. So he called his disciples to himself, and he said to them, "Assuredly I say to you, that this poor widow has put in more than all those who have given to the treasury. For they all put in out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, put in all that she had, her whole livelihood." Go to Luke chapter 21, first 4 verses. And Jesus looked up, and he saw the rich putting in their gifts into the treasury. And he saw also a certain poor widow putting in 2 mites. And he said, "Truly I say to you, that this poor widow has put in more than all. For all these out of the abundance have put in offerings for God, but she out of her poverty put in all the livelihood that she had." Now, it's interesting that Jesus is there in the court of the women. And that's where the treasury would take place. You see, there were certain courts inside the Temple Mount, inside this precinct that the temple was in. It was the court of the Gentiles. It was kind of wrapped around the whole temple. And anyone was allowed into the temple, into the court of the Gentiles to pray and to seek the Lord. And remember what had happened? They had turned that into a place of, Jesus said it was a den of thieves. They were just ripping everyone off there. Only Jews can go into that inner court. And in the inner court would be the court of the women. And so only women can only go, no Gentiles can go that far, but only now the Jewish women can go this far. And then there would have been the rest of the court where the men were allowed to go in, and that's where the sacrifices and everything would be taking place. Now, and that's where the priests would be, and that's where all of the events would take place. Now, Jesus goes a little further in, closer to the holiest of holies. And there, as he walks into that arena, there would have been what is called the Treasury. And the Treasury would have been made up of 13 different chests. Now, let me read you. Kent Hughes gives us a great description of what that would have looked like. It says, the Treasury is where they placed their offerings, which consisted of 13 brass treasure chests called trumpets, because they were shaped like inverted horns, narrow at the top, enlarged at the bottom. And according to the Mishnah, each of the chests bore inscriptions designating what the offerings were for. New shekel dues, old shekel dues, bird offerings, young birds for the whole offering, wood, frankincense, gold for the mercy seat, and then on 6 of them would have been placed free will offerings. And so it would have been quite a spectacle. You see, there's 13 different boxes, and you kind of determine, I still owe my temple tax. I got to go put that into this offering box. And then I want to give, toward the myrrh that's going to be burnt in the temple, or the oil that's going to be burnt on the lamps of the temple. And so I'm going to give so much to that particular offering box. And then my free will offering, I'm going to give to the Lord. I'm going to put into this offering box. And they would have all of these, and it would have been, everyone kind of gathering around there. Remember, it was Passover, and so it would have been, the masses of people would have been coming from everywhere, and they'd have been coming desiring to give their offerings to God. And Jesus is sitting on the steps. And it's interesting that, Mark tells us that he's sitting down, and then Luke tells us that he looks up. And this is kind of how I picture this scene. Jesus had been exhausted from all the events of the day. He goes and he sits in the court on the steps. His disciples are kind of scattered around him, and he's kind of maybe with his hands in his face, or just kind of looking down, trying to catch his breath, trying to just regroup after all of the events of the day. And then he looks up. And as he looks up, he sees the rich that are offering in great amounts of money into the treasury. Now, what does that look like? I can't even imagine. The rich, there's kind of this, they called it the trumpet, and so it was this big chest, and then it kind of narrowed so that it went into a little funnel at the top, and you had people walking up, and they're putting in, and it would took a little bit of time to put that amount of money if you're rich, and all they had was coins in that day. It wasn't dollar bills or $100 bills, or it would have been all coinage, and you take your coinage, and now you're dropping, and the rich man had the servant behind him with his little wheelbarrow, kind of walking in. They're putting handfuls in at a time, and spending 15 minutes, half hour dropping that, and everyone's going, wow, that's a lot of money. That guy must be close to God. He must really love the Lord. He's giving that kind of, and it would have been almost a show that's taking place. And Jesus isn't denouncing those that were rich, but he is going to give us some insight into what heaven thinks about it. He's going to give us some insight into really what's taking place in this scene that Jesus takes note of. Now, in an environment like that, there's an opportunity for a lot of showboating. There's the opportunity to really get the attention on yourself. I heard of a man who stood up in a meeting, and they were talking about giving to the church and, making subscriptions for donations. And he says, I want to give $100 anonymously. It took a while to sink in, didn't it? There's just kind of that I want people to acknowledge what I'm doing so that people look at me a certain way. And it seems that was what was happening. And we see it all the time, right, in our culture. You know, how many benefits there are, or how many fundraisers there are. And, you know, if you give so much, we'll put your name on a brick and it'll be there forever. And they're just looking for, so I'm going to give a $1,000 check, but it's got to be like 5 foot by 6 foot so that, you know, I got my name on it and I go and hand it to somebody and everyone knows, you know, who gave it and how much it was. And, you know, you see, men like to take the credit for the giving. And how many organizations wouldn't even exist today if there wasn't that kind of spectacle that people are looking for in order to go and put their self out there, or put their name out there, or their company out there, so that, you know, look what we did for the community. And it's all about outward appearance. And Jesus is noting this. You know, now I don't know the heart of these guys. Jesus does, but he's just kind of saying, look, let me tell you something, guys. This woman that catches his attention walks up. Jesus knows she's a widow. Was she wearing widow clothes? I don't know. Did Jesus have an earlier encounter with her and he knew her situation and prayed for her? I don't know. Maybe just because he is omniscient and he knows everything, he was aware of exactly what was going on in this woman's life. But she walks up and there was none of the oohs and ahs. Or there was almost like, you know, what is she going to give? She's this poor widow, and she has 2 mites. Now, 2 mites was a very insignificant amount of money. You guys have heard the widow's mite. This is where it comes from. The 2 mites. She walks up, and it would have been the smallest coin in the system. It was. Mark told us it was. What? I forgot the denomination there. Let me go back real quick. Mark tells us that. And it's interesting that Mark would give that kind of detail about it. He says that the poor widow came and she threw in 2 mites, which makes a quadrant. A quadrant. That was the word. A quadrant. Well, a little bit of research, I found that a quadrant was 1/64th of a denarius. A denarius would have been a day's wages. And so, just with inflation and kind of our looking at our economy right now, a man's day's wages, let's say it was $100, for a labor to get paid in a day's labor, a day's work, and that would equate that 2 little mites at about $1.50. $1.50. It really, think $1.50. What value is $1.50 when you got everyone walking up with massive amount of money? The rich are putting in massive amount of money, and Jesus turns to his disciples. And what I thought amazing about this whole thing is that Jesus saw this as a teaching moment, because what he does is he says, "Hey guys, come here. Watch this." And notice who he's talking to. He's talking to his disciples. And I want you to kind of ease up a little bit. Because Jesus, when he's talking about these events, he's talking to disciples, and he's doing it inside the court of the women, which means it wasn't for the unbeliever, it was for the believers that were there. And if you're not a believer this morning, or this isn't your church, understand something. And if you know anything about Calvary Chapel, Rio Grande Valley, is we've never ever put the squeeze on for money to anybody. And that's not what's happening here this morning. When we come to a text, we're going to cover it, and I want you to hear the heart of God here. But this isn't about money, and it's not about how much more you need to give. Right? That's not the heart of this passage, and it's not the heart that I want you to walk away with. So you can ease up. Your wallet's okay. Okay, no one's going to squeeze you. Okay. But I think there's something important here, guys. I think there's something valuable here, because what you and I are getting is a glimpse of how heaven sees things. When you want to know how to live, you go to God and his word, because he's the one who created everything. You want to talk about morals, you go to God, and God tells us what right and wrong is morally. You want to know about marriage. You want to know about raising children. You want to know about life. You go to the Word of God. You can't go to this world to try to figure those things out because the world's got it confused. God's the one who designed it all. And so if we're going to learn anything about money, then we need to go to God and His Word and say, God, what is this all about? And I think here He gives us some incredible insight. How heaven sees things down here. And I think one of the things you notice right off the bat is that God's not impressed with money. The rich were putting in a lot. And he wasn't condemning them for doing so, but he took note of this little widow who put in a little. And he's gonna lay out for us why he took note of it. If you notice there at the end of verse, or there in verse 4, Jesus says, for all these, he's talking about those rich guys, out of their abundance have put in their offerings for God. But she, out of her poverty, put in all the livelihood that she had. Very, very interesting that Jesus would make mention of that, and that he would say, look, let me tell you the difference between the two givers. The rich were giving much. They were giving out of their abundance. In other words, they were giving, but it really wasn't costing them anything to give. They were giving much, but it wasn't costing them anything to give. But this widow that gave the $1.50, it cost her something. And Jesus takes note of that fact. And what I want to do this morning, and we get four short verses, and really it's something a little bit different. There's not a whole lot to exposit from that text, but there's a lot of observations that we can make in those 4 verses. And so what I want to do this morning is make some of those observations together. I think one of the things you note as you're reading those 4 verses is that Jesus never condemned the treasury that was in the temple. Jesus, he condemned the money changers that were trying to take advantage of the people that were, buying trading in their coins for shekels, and he condemned those that were selling the animals for the sacrifices because they were charging exorbitant prices in order to do so. But he never condemned the treasury that was there. And I find that to be an interesting point that Jesus makes by not even making the point. He wasn't embarrassed about it. He wasn't going, man, I can't believe they're actually accepting the offerings that are coming in order for the temple to continue to do what it's doing, for the sacrifices, for the oil, for the myrrh, for all of the different things that were taking place. Matter of fact, Jesus doesn't condemn it once. Matter of fact, it seems as though he's commending it. I know for me as a pastor, guys, this is one of the subjects that I avoid as much as I can, because I've always had a bad experience when it came to giving in churches. It was just one of those where I always felt like people were trying to, manipulate, or they were trying to, I went to one church and they said, there's 5 people here and they're going to give $1,000 and we're not leaving until those 5 people stand up. And like, really? And I want nothing to do with that. And so when it comes to manipulation, or when it comes to somehow persuading, I don't think that's biblical. I do think that Jesus sees giving as biblical, though. And so Jesus is not embarrassed by the treasury. There's the second thing I took note of as I was looking at that text is that is Jesus chose to support his work by the offerings of his people. Do you realize Jesus, this is how God does spiritual, eternal work? It's by the offerings of his people. Do you know that God can do it however he's so pleased to do it? God could have, like on Fridays, rained gold from heaven, if that's how he chose to do it. He did it with manna. Remember, every day they'd have to go collect the manna, and then, on Friday they'd get 2 days worth of manna so that they didn't have to collect anything on the Sabbath. And God can do whatever he wants to do. So God could you could just go on, like, every Friday, once I get saved, every Friday there's $1,000 in my bank account. God could do that if he wanted to. But God chose that he was going to use his children in order to accomplish his work. That's how God designed it. And I think he designed it very wisely in doing so, because when it comes to giving, it deals with one of our greatest weaknesses: selfishness. You see, when it comes to giving, I got to be selfless. It's got to be something where I'm going, man, this is something that I would never do in my own, something I designed or something. It's something that I'm going to give to God because that's what he's asked me to do. And it helps us not be selfish people. Because I think God's more concerned about building his children than he is collecting money. He's trying to build us, our character. And so when it comes to giving, it challenges us not to be selfish. And it also reminds us that everything I have comes from God. You see, when I'm giving, I'm reminded once again, God, this isn't mine. It's not mine at all. This is yours. Everything I have is because you gave it to me. And I want to be a faithful steward. I'm just taking care of your stuff. And if I'm going to be faithful with the stuff that you've given me, you've asked me to give your money in this way, at this time, and in this fashion, so I want to be faithful to do that because I acknowledge it's yours. It comes from God. The fourth thing not actually the fourth thing, I'm still on the second thing. It reminds us that our security is not money, but God. Guys, when we're giving, I'm declaring that, God, you're the one who takes care of me. And my bank account and my stocks and all the things that I can very easily begin to put my confidence in, that's not where my confidence comes from. All that can go away in a day. My confidence comes from God. He's my supplier. He's my sustainer. He's the one who protects me. He's the one who provides for me. And if you start to put your security in those things, then you'll never put your security in him. And it's a constant reminder. I also think that when we're giving, and when this widow was giving, I think what it really declares is that I'm putting a little bit of more of my heart in heaven. Did you get that, guys? When I'm giving, I'm putting a little more of my heart in heaven. Well, why is that? Well, I want you to turn to Matthew chapter 6. Look at verse 19. This isn't the first time Jesus taught on the subject. It was at the very beginning of his ministry. Matthew chapter 6, in the 19th verse, Jesus would tell his disciples this. He says, do not lay up for yourself treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourself treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. Look at verse 21. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It's where your treasure is. That's where your heart is. And it's if all your treasure is just here, then your heart's here. But if you're storing your treasures in heaven, man, you're longing for heaven. Many years ago, when we were still very early in planting the church, someone had donated 3M stock, about 100, somewhere there was like 100 stocks for 3M, and it was the craziest thing that all of a sudden, you're like 100 3M stocks. I mean, that's incredible. So how much is stuff worth? And I start, go up and looked at the worth of a stock in the newspaper at that day. That was before the internet was even there. I just dated myself. Okay. And I remember going to the newspaper and like, what's 3M? 3M, this is how much 3M's worth. And I remember the next morning waking up, did it change? And you wake up a week later, did the stock go up or go down? Should we sell or should we buy? And all of a sudden I'm interested in 3M. I never even heard of 3M. A week earlier. Because there was some treasure there now. And all of a sudden I was interested in that. And I think Jesus is telling us that very same thing. No, you know what? If I start storing my treasures in heaven, then heaven's going to be where my interest is. This is what I'm concerned about. For wherever your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And so God saw fit that he would use his people. And I think he used his people so that his people would not become selfish. We would be reminded where everything came from, so that our hearts would be not attached to this world, but our hearts would be attached to heaven. Another thing I observed in this little passage is that I get to be part of what God's doing in this world. That amazes me. That I get to be part of what God is doing through my giving. In missions, man, we're supporting guys in Peru. We're supporting guys over for many years in India, and we're just as a church, we're just investing in eternal things. And you realize that whatever fruit's going on there, that's also going to my account. We're part of something way bigger than just what's going on in our backyard, or just what's going on in my house. That I get to invest in the things that God's doing. Could you imagine if we lived in a world and God had designed it in such a way that there's no way for any of us to affect eternity or to affect the things that are eternal? What a bummer that would be. You just kind of like, well, how do I help? No, we don't want your help. How do I serve? Oh, no, we don't want it. No, God designed it so that you and I can be part of something bigger than us. So that we together can reach a community, we can reach a culture, we can be part of a mission that God is doing. I think another thing that you kind of take note of is that God never, in this text or anywhere else in the Bible, declares that he needs your money. Never. He never even hints that he needs your money. Because understand something, God is wealthy. He owns it all. I remember, I once in a while will turn on some of the television programs and some of the preachers that are, and I do it, I don't know if it's just for entertainment or to see what's going on out there. But you hear so many things, you're kind of like, well, that's not biblical. Oh, that's not biblical. And and you just kind of see how they're manipulating in order to get more money. I remember hearing one preacher say, God needs you like he has never needed you before. And in a sense, he's right. God never needed you in the first place. So he needs you now just like he never needed you before. He don't. He don't need your money, guys. He doesn't need my money. He doesn't need anything from me. God is doing just fine without me. He's doing just fine without you. You see, giving is our opportunity to be part of what God's doing. I think David summarizes it perfect in 1 Chronicles 29. Would you turn there, 1 Chronicles chapter 29? This is when they're offering the temple, they're dedicating the temple. They had gathered all the gold, they had gathered all of the implements and all of the different pieces of the worship of God, and they're dedicating it to God now. And watch what he says in 1 Chronicles chapter 29, beginning in verse 10. He says, "Therefore David blessed the Lord before all the assembly, and David said, 'Blessed are you, Lord God of Israel, our Father, forever and ever. Yours, O Lord, is the greatness, the power and the glory, the victory and the majesty. For all that is in heaven and in earth is yours. Yours is the kingdom, O Lord, and you are exalted as head over all. Both riches and honor come from you, and you reign over all. In your hand is power and might, and in your hand it is to make great and to give strength to all. Now therefore, O God, we thank you. We praise your glorious name. But who am I? And who are my people that we should be able to offer so willingly as this? For all things come from you, and of your own we have given you." That's man, if that doesn't sum it up. David goes, "Look, we're giving you all this, God, but it's yours anyway." And you are allowing us to do this. That you would give us this opportunity that we're able to offer willingly for your worship and for your glory. You see, David understood the heart of giving. I think there's another note here in this passage, and it's this widow. Guys, I understand something. A widow would have been dependent upon others to sustain her. There was no Social Security coming in every month. She didn't have, a widow, whatever her husband, when he died, whatever he left her, that was what she had to live on. Maybe she had a house, maybe she had, some substance around her, but what we find in this text is that $1.50 is what she had to her name. And there was no requirement for her to go and to offer anything because she had nothing coming in. But she willingly gave to the Lord. This was something she did out of her own volition. It wasn't something that was asked of her or something that was required of her. This was something that she did because she wanted to worship God with her giving. And I think that's an important point. Because anytime we're giving to God, it should be because it's something that we desire to do. Not because someone's asked us to do or someone's manipulated us to do. It has to be because we desire to do it. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 6. And I want to read this to you. Again, if you want to turn there, you're welcome to do that. 2 Corinthians chapter 9. It's in the 6th verse. Paul writing to the church of Corinth, and he says this, and I say, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Look at verse 7. So let each one give as he purposes in his heart, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loves a cheerful giver. Man, that verse is just, it's classic. He says, look, you're giving, if you're giving grudgingly, can I just tell you, don't give. You're not going to get any reward for it. God knows the heart. And if you're going, man, God, I gave you $50 last week. I can't even believe. Really? If you're giving grudgingly, or you're just giving because there's a need, you know what? That's not giving. That's not biblical giving. Has someone ever done you a favor, and then after they did the favor, they kind of like were mad that they did you the favor? And then I remember that's happened to me. The guy like, well, I did this for you. I'm like, really? I wish you didn't. Take it back. Because if you're doing it grudgingly, it doesn't mean anything. And when it comes to giving, this is how he says, look, everyone give whatever you purpose in your heart. The question comes up, well, am I supposed to give 10%? I'm supposed to give 2%? I mean, what am I supposed to give? Well, the Old Testament was like, you're to give 10% of everything that comes in. That was Old Testament, right? But here's, I think, the principles here. You give whatever you purpose in your heart. And don't do it with grudge. Don't do it just because there's a necessity in front of you. You do it because this is my act of worship, and I want to be part of what God's doing. Now, I also noticed that the size is not measured by the amount, but by the sacrifice that's made in the giving. Did you see that in that text? Jesus wasn't impressed with the rich giving a lot out of their abundance. Now, I'm not saying that, well, I have a lot, so I don't have to give. That's not what the question is it costing you something to give? Or is it just, that's just some spare change I can give. It's not going to affect anything. It didn't cost anything. You see, I don't think this woman gave her last pair of shoes. I don't think she didn't have a house to go home to. I don't think that the account says that, she from here on, she's just, I'm going to put everything I got in the offering box and I'm going to go die. I don't think that's what the text is teaching. I think it was everything she possessed at that moment, she went and she put into the offering box. She didn't have a bank account to count on. She didn't have, something else to fall on. She gave of her poverty everything, her whole livelihood, everything she had in her possession. And she gave it with a heart. Now, and I think, there's something to this, guys, that Jesus takes note of. And I want to look at that in a second. But you see, if our giving doesn't cost us something, then is it really an offering to the Lord? David said it like this, and again, I'm going to ask you to turn here. 2 Samuel chapter 24, look at verse 24. 2 Samuel 24. Now, here's the setting. David's going to go make an offering to the Lord. And Araunah, one of the men who owned a piece of land that David was going to offer it on, offered David the land and the animals in order to sacrifice on. Watch the story. And David, and the king said to Araunah, "No, but I will surely buy it from you for a price. Nor will I offer burnt offerings to the Lord my God with that which cost me nothing." So David bought the threshing floor and the oxen for 50 shekels of silver. Here was the scene. The guy says, Onan says, "Look, I'll just give you the land and I'll give you the ox you can offer to the Lord. I'll just give you all of it." And David goes, No, I can't offer God something that doesn't cost me something. That's not an offering. It's got to cost me something. And so David paid the 50 shekels. Here's the land, here's the oxen. And he goes, now I can offer it to the Lord because it's something that came from me. It wasn't something that was just, left over or someone gave me. You see, the real issue is did it cost something? And I think that's what impressed Jesus here. Is that this wasn't just someone giving their leftovers, it was someone giving their all. Now, There was another point here that I thought was pretty interesting, is that Jesus knew the amount and he recognized the sacrifice that was made. Did you note that as I did? As Jesus was watching the rich, he knew that they were giving out of their abundance. Jesus knew. He knew exactly, how much they were giving, how much they had left over. He was aware of what this widow had and what she was going to have left over after she gave. And then Jesus calls his disciples together and he says, guys, watch this. This is what heaven sees. It wasn't the amount. It was the sacrifice. And Jesus knew. And I think nothing's changed today. Jesus knows. Warren Wiersbe said it like this. He sees what we give and why we give. He knows those who are giving God their best. He's interested in the proportion, not the portion, how much is left and not how much is given. Well, that was good. You see, Jesus is concerned not with how much you give, but is it something that's costing us something when we give. Notice the next thing here, and I thought this was interesting. This woman was going to walk away, and she was confident that God was going to take care of her. She put in everything she had, and she was confident that God was going to supply her need as she walked away from that temple that day. And guys, I think that very same thing is true today. Why do I think that? Well, Matthew 6:31, Jesus says this. He says, therefore, do not worry, saying, what shall I eat, or what shall I drink, or what shall I wear? For after all these things the Gentiles seek, for your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things, but seek first the kingdom of God. And that's exactly what she was doing. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about its own thing. Sufficient is the day, is its own trouble. You see, Jesus very clearly says, look, you seek first the kingdom, and then I'm going to take care of those needs. And I think this woman had such incredible faith that she knew that. She knew, I'm putting my last $1.50, and instead of buying a loaf of bread, I'm going to give that to God. And God's going to give me a loaf of bread somewhere else, because I'm going to put God first. I'm going to seek the kingdom first. And it's interesting that he would note that Jesus would declare that if we're seeking first the kingdom, he would take care of the other things. And it's also interesting that the size of the gift wasn't the value to God. It was the sacrifice. It was, and I think we fall into this trap, guys, because of our culture. I really do. What kind of our thinking is that, well, I really don't have much to give, so it really doesn't matter if I give. We'll just let the rich give. That the rich will do it. And I think that comes from, think about this, when it comes to taxes in our culture, what happens? If you make under so much money and we're considered poor, then you don't pay any taxes at all. So just the rich are to take care of that, and then the poor don't have to contribute anything. But and that might be fine for a government, and that's not fine for the kingdom. I think there's more to it than that. I think it's really a matter of giving according to what we've been given. I think that's the biblical perspective here. Paul, when he was writing to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, he says, now concerning the collection for the saints, as I've given orders to the churches of Galatia, so you must do also on the first day of the week. Let each one of you lay something aside. Watch what he says, storing up as he may prosper. In other words, according to how much you prospered, then that's how much you're to offer. And God doesn't look at, well, that's a little and that's a lot. God's not even concerned about the money. He's concerned about the heart. He's concerned about the heart in giving. He's concerned about, is this something that really has any value to us? And I don't think it's, for someone giving 10%, that's like, wow, there's no way. And for others, 10% is nothing. You see, God isn't concerned about the amount. He's concerned about the heart. And what's interesting is that this event, guys, and we'll wrap it up right here. And here's what I'm convinced about. This kind of giving blessed Jesus. Did you take note of that? Think about the picture here. They're all sitting around watching all of this take place. The disciples were somewhere in the vicinity because Jesus says, hey guys, come here. You got to check this out. And when the word that he uses there, he was calling his disciples, it was that Jesus was kind of like with excitement and anticipation to let them in on what he had just saw. And it blessed his heart that there was someone in Jerusalem that got it. There was it was a widow who had nothing, but she got it. And within a few hours, within a short few days, Jesus would be going to a cross and he was going to give his all for you and I. And I tell you, I don't think there was more of an encouraging moment in those last few days than watching this widow who understood what it meant to worship God with her whole heart and with all of her substance. And then that moment, because Jesus says there's someone that gets it. Amongst all the Pharisees and all the facades and all of the different, looking for attention that these guys were, there was a widow there that got it. That understood what the kingdom of heaven was all about. And Jesus notes it. Jesus blessed by it. And within the most difficult time of his life, he was able to look back and say, you know what? That woman, she got it. And now as he goes and hangs on a cross and he offers up himself, he knew that there was others that get it. This isn't about money. Please don't think that in any way this is what it's about. Somehow like, man, the church is in need of money. I got to teach us. We teach through the Bible, and when we come to it, I'm gonna share, because I think it's heaven's perspective, guys. And I even neglect it. I confess to you guys, I neglect, because if you've been part of this fellowship for any amount of time, we don't pass a plate. That we don't receive an offering, that there's offering boxes. You want to give, you give. If you don't want to give, you don't give. Because I believe that where God guides, God provides. I believe that for 30 years now. And I've seen God provide. And I know that God provides through those who love him and those who want to be part of his work. And I thank God for those that do. But it's never, if you're going to give grudgingly, please go buy a Big Mac. Seriously. Go buy a big screen TV. Go do something. If you're going to give grudgingly, or you're going to give out of some wrong motive, you're better off using it for something else. But if you want to give to what God is doing and you want to be part of what God is doing, then bless your heart. And let me tell you something, man. I think there's two questions we got to ask in a lesson like this. We got to ask the question, how do we give? How do we give? Do we give grudgingly or do we give willingly? Because that's what Jesus was looking at. How do you give? That when he was watching, he says he was watching how they gave. And so the question is, am I giving grudgingly or am I giving willingly? I think the second question is this: when I give, does it cost me anything? When I'm giving to the Lord. And I don't think it's just monetary, guys. I think it's our time, it's our gifts, it's our service, it's our what we invest in. Does it cost me anything? Because if it doesn't cost me anything, then it's probably not being noticed in heaven.